The day after Easter, I drove across the state to attend the ministerial retreat for the Florida chapter of the UU Ministers Association. And we stayed at the Day Spring Retreat Center near St. Petersburg. And some of you may have been there over the years for various things, but if you haven't and you get a chance, I encourage you to go. It's very peaceful there. On our last day before our closing worship, I wandered over to the Labyrinth. Now, something you might not know about me is that I love labyrinths. I find them very calming and soothing, and I will always walk one if I can. So on this day, the weather had cooled after heavy storms the day before, and the labyrinth is set behind the chapel and is made of gray bricks with the lines of the path set in smaller red bricks. And when I first arrived to it, I wish I had found it the night before because it appeared to have wonderful low lighting all around it. Perhaps next time. So what exactly is a labyrinth? Well, like we heard, it's not a maze. In a maze, you get to make choices of which path you'll take. A labyrinth has one path into the center, and you use that same path to go back out. According to the Franciscan Spiritual Center, while this path is the same for all walkers, each walker brings a variety of cultural, religious, and spiritual traditions to make the journey unique. As a tool for meditation, an experience for prayer, an opportunity for spiritual questioning or discernment, the labyrinth is to be approached with reverence and respect for the journey to the center. The great gift of the labyrinth is that you don't have to do anything in a particular way. It's the walking through the pathways that will help you in prayer and meditation and play. As St. Augustine said, it is solved by the walking. Now, there are many ways to journey through a labyrinth, and the most common practice is the one I tend to follow. It involves preparing for a moment before you go in, releasing as you walk through to the center, centering for as long as you need, and finally, once you're ready, journeying back out. So I started this labyrinth on this particular day by standing at the entry point and taking 3 deep breaths. I tried to clear my mind. The key word is try. I don't always succeed at that part. And then I began to walk slowly. At each turn in the labyrinth, I paused, turned slowly, and considered anything I might need to set down. I named those things silently in my head as I imagined setting them down. I continued, noticing as one section took me almost to the beginning before turning back again. Another section takes me toward the center before turning. Close, but not yet. Pause, set down, turn. Pause, set down, turn, move forward. Now, finally, I arrived at the center. And one would think that arriving at the center is the finish of the labyrinth, but it's not. It's kind of like the t-shirts you can buy in St. Augustine at the lighthouse that say, I climbed the 219 steps of the lighthouse. Yeah, but then you still have to climb 219 steps down, which every time I have done it has felt way harder than the 219 up. And it's the same with the labyrinth. Getting to the center, setting all the things down, that's only the first part. You can't stay there forever. You can't just teleport out of the labyrinth. Eventually, you'll have to journey back out. But I'm learning you don't have to go right away. I don't know, probably because of the times I've just spun around and started walking right back out, I've gotten dizzy. This time, though, I paused. Deep breaths. I listened to the wind in the trees, to the birds, to my own breath. The pause stretched out longer, and a sense of clarity fell over me. Not answers exactly, but clarity and a sense of calm. The pause continued, although the sense of time began to slip away. It was just me, the birds, the trees, the sun, and the wind. I paused, letting that clarity settle over me like a well-worn coat. Finally, slowly, I turned to start my journey outward. I repeated the steps back out. Turn, pause, and this time I picked things up. Not necessarily what I'd put down on the way in. This time, it was more like gathering the things I felt I'd need for the journey ahead. The clarity made it easier to know what to pick up and what to leave behind. As slowly as I walked through the labyrinth to the center, I walked back out. Again, noticing when it felt like I was almost to the end, just to turn and work towards the center again. The slow ebb and flow draws me to the labyrinth every time. It's peaceful if you let it be. That morning, as I walked quietly back to our meeting space, the idea for this sermon rushed into my head. And as soon as I got to my laptop, I wrote down some quick notes. Over the next week or two, I let it percolate as some lessons from the labyrinth came to me. The first lesson is the one I walked out of the labyrinth with. As I stood in the center of this time, I was reminded of my own journey of faith, the varied turns in the path that led me to Unitarian Universalism, the theologies and doctrines and dogmas that I set down as I left the Methodist Church as a teen and the Assemblies of God as a young adult. This time, the time I sat in the center of my own labyrinth, looking at all the broken pieces from where I hadn't set things down as gently as I could have. There were pieces I would never use again, and some that I might at least maybe want to look at. In my own internal labyrinth, I spent a few years hearing the wind whisper, "Be still and know." The bits of a verse that irritated me so much growing up. The "be still" used against a fidgety child. Know what? My teen self would rage because I wasn't seeing love in the church, and that was what I understood God to be. Those years in my own labyrinth allowed the words to soften. Be still. Be still and know. Know what? Know that I am worthy and wonderful and called and commissioned and loved and lonely. I needed community again. I needed a religious community again without it hurting so very much. So once I was able to take a deep breath and journey back out, I picked up some of those broken pieces, not all of them. And in the years since, I've set other things down and picked up pieces I never thought I would. I have been on a continual journey of examining my faith and what has truth and meaning for me and what helps me be a better person. And that's the beautiful thing about Unitarian Universalism. We are a space where you can journey through your own internal labyrinth and set down and pick up the parts that are meaningful to you. Our pluralism doesn't just apply to how we as a congregation or as an association view our corporate sources. No, it applies to ourselves as too. If I were to ask each of you to share what guides your life and your decision-making, we'd find a lot of similarities, but no two of us would be the same. Even in my innermost friend circle, sisters of the heart who journeyed through seminary with me, even we have different practices and beliefs that make up who we are, each as you use. Now, maybe I'm saying something that the rest of you have already figured out, and I just needed to take the time in the labyrinth to breathe and think. That's entirely possible, because it seems so simple, and yet not. Something I'd never named that way before. My own belief, philosophy of life, values to live by, however you want to describe that. But for me, mine relies on pluralism to thrive. I learned about stewardship and giving at 5 from the Presbyterian Church that gave each of the children a little white plastic church bank to collect money for the offering. I learned about the joys of expressive worship as a kid in the interpretive dance team for the Methodist Church I went to in elementary school. The first sermon I ever preached was at 16 at the talent show for Nazarene youth statewide. My understanding of what it means to be a Jesus follower came from and through my time in the Assemblies of God. I still follow my pagan traditions at the major holidays, both the family traditions my dad quietly passed down and the, I'm a lazy pagan, workarounds I've picked up as second nature. When I came into Unitarian Universalism, I thought I had my little spiritual suitcase packed neatly. Nothing bad, only good things. Room for more as I learned language to go with things I'd get in trouble for before. Universal salvation, the oneness of God, everyone is loved and saved. And that worked for the longest time. Until for me, I kept missing stuff. I've said multiple times, going to United in Dayton, Ohio, allowed me the chance to dust off some things I didn't know I needed. And even now, I know it's all what works for this time. In a few years, I might need to shift the balance of my pluralism, and it will all still be okay within Unitarian Universalism because we're pluralistic. And that's the second lesson I picked up while standing in the labyrinth this month. Our pluralism isn't just what list of sources we draw from. We draw from so many. Even our current 6 make room for more than that. Our pluralism isn't just about the direct experience that's over there, and the Jewish and Christian teachings that are over there, and the humanist teachings over there, and so on. No, I think it's more than that. I think our pluralism also celebrates the way we rub off on one another because of our own internal pluralism. I've learned new things about traditions I didn't know much about while I've been a UU. I've picked up ways of doing things, ways of saying things, ways of thinking things, all because of being around UUs who are different than me. I don't know. I think that's kind of cool. And finally, a third lesson came to me that week from the Labyrinth, one I hadn't expected. And that's the lesson of liminal space. The center of a labyrinth is an example of a liminal space. Melissa Cohen, a licensed clinical social worker in New York, describes it this way. Liminal space can best be described as going through a change or going from place to place, from one thing to the next. It's the space between what is and what will happen next. I realized that week that the walk in the labyrinth was important because of when it happened. For I am in a liminal space. I mean, really, everyone has been in a liminal space at some point in their life. My liminal space, I'm in my 7th year of professional ministry, and my life has been an interesting series of 7-year cycles. I worked in television for 7 years and then was a crochet designer and teacher for 7 years before pursuing my call to ministry. And I'm not sure what the next cycle will bring. It's uncomfortable not knowing. I want to force it. I want to make decisions now about what will happen in the next few years, and I can't. My life currently doesn't allow for me to rush to what I think is the next stage. So I sit in this liminal space. For the next year or so, I plan on doing a lot of discernment and actually sitting in this space, which, if I'm honest, I hate the idea of doing that, even when I know it's necessary. Because here's the thing, liminal spaces, they're uncomfortable. They're supposed to be. You don't just stay in a liminal space, like you just don't stay in the center of a labyrinth. You move through it, but you can't rush it. I mean, you can. Trust me, you can, but you shouldn't. It makes it worse. I've learned this over my lifetime. But it doesn't have to be awful. There are still lots of things that are uncomfortable, but worth it. My teaching pastor used to tell me about liminal spaces, usually when I was complaining about them. She would say, the only way out is through. The only way through is in its time. Enjoy the ride. I used to scoff because it sounded a lot like that be still BS I grew up with. And so I'd rush it. I didn't like being uncomfortable. I was a certified type A perfectionist with a second language and planning all the things. I rushed forward every time there was a chance to do so. I get it. It's tempting. It's still tempting to me. And yet, my teaching pastor was right. Because here's what the last lesson is that I've learned in the labyrinth. This liminal space, it's a creative space. It's a fun and dreamy kind of space. The liminal space is full of what if and yes and energy. It's a time when you can dream big, the big dreams, and let your brain and heart wander. It's a time when you look back and gather the precious things and jot down all the memories. Liminal spaces are often the times of endings and beginnings, of goodbyes and hellos. Liminal spaces can be bittersweet, and they can be beautiful. Just like we can't stay in the center of the labyrinth forever, we cannot stay in the liminal space forever either. Eventually, we do have to move forward to continue our journey. But don't rush yourself and get dizzy. Pause, breathe, be still, and know that you are loved and whole and holy and called and in community. My friends, my hope is that these lessons from my journey in the labyrinth have been helpful. There are many lessons from the labyrinth, just like there are lessons we learn from our varied sources that have meaning for ourselves as individuals and as the beautiful tapestry that is Unitarian Universalism. And may we remember that the only way through the liminal space, is to continue moving forward, just like we have to do in the labyrinth. Amen. May it be so, and blessed be.